I had spent the entire afternoon at the mall buying a few things for myself, something I hadn't done in a while. As I walked through the aisles, I couldn't help but think about how nice it would be to have my husband back. He had been gone on his business trip for almost 2 weeks, and while I had enjoyed the time to myself, a part of me missed the routine of our life together. I missed him in ways I hadn't realized, but as I turned into our street, a strange sensation tugged at me. Something was off. The air felt different. The atmosphere around me was thick with tension. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the excitement of finally seeing him again after all this time. And then I saw it. I pulled into the driveway, and my stomach twisted into knots. My heart seemed to stop. There, in the distance, I saw thick black smoke curling up into the sky. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe a neighbor's car had caught fire. But no, it was my lover's car. The car that had become a symbol of my secret. The car I knew all too well. It was right in front of our house, completely engulfed in flames. My breath caught in my throat. What was going on? I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears. Why was his car here? Why was it on fire? Was it an accident? No, it couldn't be. The fire wasn't natural. The flames were too controlled, too deliberate. A sickening sense of dread crawled over me as I got out of the car. I could barely move my legs as I made my way toward the door. Every step felt heavier, the air growing colder with each passing second. The fire was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles. My head was spinning. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the front door. What if my husband had found out? Had he come home early? Was this all his doing? I stepped inside and was immediately hit with an eerie silence. A silence that felt wrong, unnatural. The house was usually filled with noise, the sound of the TV or the faint hum of the kitchen, as my husband prepared dinner after a long day. But today, it was as though the world had stopped. I called out, "Honey?" My voice trembled, but there was no reply. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. My eyes scanned the entryway, and that's when I saw them. My lover's clothes, his jacket, shoes, and parts of his shirt, scattered across the floor. It wasn't like he had left in a hurry or accidentally dropped them. No, the way they were carelessly strewn about, it was as if someone had torn them off in panic. My breath quick keying. My mind was racing, but nothing made sense. Why would his clothes be here? What had happened? I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. I picked up his jacket and held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, but also the weight of everything I had done. I couldn't help but feel the crushing guilt creeping up on me. But at the same time, fear rose in my chest. What was my husband doing? Had he found out? Had he come back early? I took another step deeper into the house, my feet almost moving on their own. The air felt thick, heavy with secrets as I moved towards the bedroom. Each step felt like a lifetime, my mind struggling to grasp what was happening. My heart hammered in my chest, the dread growing with each second. What was I going to find in that room? Had my husband already confronted him? Or worse, had he done something to him? When I reached the bedroom door, my hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I felt my stomach twist. My whole body seemed to freeze in place for a moment, my mind begging me to turn back, to walk away, to forget everything. But I knew I couldn't. I opened the door slowly, heart racing, dreading what I was about to witness. As the door creaked open, I immediately felt a cold rush of air. It hit my face like a slap, but the room inside felt suffocating. The dim light from the hallway barely cut through the darkness of the room. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. What was I going to find in there? A part of me was praying that it wasn't as bad as I feared. Another part was terrified of the truth. I stepped into the room, my feet heavy as though they were weighed down by some invisible force, and then I saw it. My heart sank into my stomach, my knees nearly buckling beneath me. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. There, on the bed, was my husband. But it wasn't just him. It was what he had done to my lover that left me breathless. My husband wasn't lying on the bed in a peaceful slumber, nor was he the calm, collected man I had left just days ago. No, he was sitting upright, his eyes wide with a fury I had never seen before. But it wasn't just anger that radiated from him. It was something darker, something colder. It was revenge. And then I saw my lover. He was unconscious, lying on the floor in front of the bed, blood staining his clothes. His once pristine appearance was now a mess of disheveled clothing, bruises, and cuts. His face was unrecognizable, swollen from what I assumed were punches. I felt my throat tighten, but no words came out. I couldn't breathe. My husband stood up as I entered, his eyes locking onto mine. His gaze was cold, unfeeling, almost detached. It was as if the man I thought I knew had completely vanished. "You're home early," he said, his voice low and controlled, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. "I'm sure you'll want to hear all about this." My mind spun, the room starting to close in around me. Was this a dream? How could this be happening? I wanted to say something, to explain myself, to beg him for forgiveness, but the words were caught in my throat. How could I possibly explain my betrayal? How could I justify the affair when I was staring at the result of it in front of me? "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" he asked, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. There was no warmth in his words, no hint of the man who used to love me. The silence in the room grew heavy. I couldn't look away from my lover, lying there in pain. He had been my escape, my secret. But now, I saw him for what he really was. Just a part of the betrayal. Just one piece of the puzzle that I had put together without thinking of the consequences. My husband took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Do you want to know what I've done?" he asked, his voice tinged with an icy calmness. I made sure he knew exactly who he was messing with. "You thought I wouldn't find out about the affair, that I wouldn't catch on to what was happening right under my nose. But I did. I always do." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My stomach twisted in knots, and I could taste the bitter bile rising in my throat. My heart broke in ways I didn't think were possible, realizing that my betrayal had torn apart not only my marriage, but also everything I had once believed in. Then he leaned in closer, his voice now a whisper, almost too soft to hear. "This is only the beginning," he said. "You wanted to play your games, and now we'll see who's really in control." It wasn't just the anger I saw in his eyes. It was the certainty. The cold, calculating certainty that he had already planned his revenge. And I was the target. I stood there, frozen, as the reality of my situation sank in. I wanted to scream, to explain myself, but the words were gone. My mind was scrambling to piece together what had just happened. The sight of my lover on the floor, bruised and bloodied, haunted me. What had my husband done to him? More importantly, what had he done to me? My husband took another step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked calm. Too calm. As if he had been waiting for this moment for far too long. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the sheer coldness in it. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was something far more calculated. He glanced down at my lover, his lips curling into a smirk. "You know, I should be thanking you," he said, his voice tinged with an almost cruel amusement. "Without you, I wouldn't have found out how easily you could throw away everything we built together. But now? Now I get to show you what happens when you betray me." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had never seen him like this before. The man I once knew, kind, patient, trusting, had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. It was as though he had been living with a mask all this time, and now the real him was finally exposed. And it terrified me. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself, to explain why I had been unfaithful, to beg for his forgiveness. But the words were stuck in my throat. How could I explain the feelings that led me to my lover? How could I justify my actions when I was standing in front of a man who had loved me, trusted me, and was now broken because of my betrayal? My husband took another slow step toward me, his gaze unrelenting. "You should have never crossed me," he said, almost to himself. "You thought I wouldn't find out. You thought I wouldn't notice the little things. The way he would show up when I wasn't around. The late night calls. I knew every damn moment. And now, here we are." He paused, letting the silence hang between us like a weight too heavy to bear. Then he added, his voice cold as ice, "But I'm not like you. I don't run from my problems. I solve them. And I don't care how long it takes. I will make sure you both pay for what you've done." The words sent a chill down my spine. I could see it in his eyes now. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just hurt. He was methodical, plotting. He had planned this, and I was the one who was going to suffer the consequences. I felt a pang of regret that I couldn't escape. How had it all come to this? What had I been thinking when I decided to betray him? The guilt washed over me like a tidal wave, but it was too late. As I looked down at my lover, lying motionless on the floor, I realized that my husband wasn't done yet. The worst was still to come. The silence in the room grew thick, almost suffocating. I could feel the weight of my husband's gaze on me, his eyes piercing through me, as if searching for any sign of remorse, any explanation. But I had nothing to say. How could I? How could I explain something that had been buried in the depths of my own guilt? My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling, but I stayed silent. And then my husband moved. He walked over to my lover's lifeless body, crouching beside him, his hands hovering over the man like he was inspecting an object. There was no sign of fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He was calm, too calm for what had just transpired. "I hope you realize," he said quietly, his voice almost an eerie whisper, "what I'm about to do isn't just about him. It's about you. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And now I have to make sure you understand the gravity of your choices." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, a heavy, crushing realization that this wasn't just about punishing my lover. No, it was about showing me the consequences of my actions, the affair, the lies, the betrayal. All of it had brought me to this moment, to the edge of a cliff that I couldn't climb back from. He stood up and turned to face me, his expression hardening. "You think you can just walk away from this? Think again," he said, his voice low but filled with an ominous certainty. "The real punishment begins now." I wanted to protest, to beg him for mercy, but the words never left my mouth. It wasn't just the fear of what he might do. It was the realization that I deserved whatever was coming. I had broken his trust. I had torn apart the life we had built together. But what came next was something I couldn't have prepared for. My husband motioned for me to come closer. I hesitated, my feet glued to the floor, but something in his eyes told me that if I didn't comply, things would escalate. Slowly, I approached him, my legs shaking beneath me. He pointed at my lover's bloodied body. "Do you see this?" he asked. "This is what happens when you think you can play with fire and not get burned." I nodded, my heart sinking deeper with every word he spoke. I had no defense, no excuse. This was my fault. He then gestured toward the door. "Get out, and don't come back until you've figured out exactly what you've lost. I don't want to see you here again. When I come back, I'll have everything sorted. For good." I froze. My mind raced, trying to process everything that was happening. What did he mean by sorted? What was he planning to do? Before I could ask, he turned and walked out of Na's room, leaving me standing there alone with the aftermath of my choices. The silence in the house was deafening now. The only sound was the rush of my own heartbeat, pounding in my chest like a drum. I looked down at my lover, still lying motionless on the floor. The reality of the situation crashed over me. My marriage was over. My lover was broken, and I was left standing in the wreckage of my own doing. I knew my husband wasn't done yet. There was more to come, and I was powerless to stop it. Time seemed to crawl by as I stood in the empty, cold room, surrounded by the wreckage of my choices. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything, but all I could focus on was the chilling silence and the looming presence of what was about to unfold. My husband had left, but I knew he wasn't finished. What he had planned, I could only imagine, and that thought terrified me. I glanced down at my lover, his body still sprawled across the floor. Blood was beginning to pool beneath him, staining the carpet. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt for him anymore. This was my punishment too. But that didn't make the guilt I felt for my marriage, my betrayal, any easier to bear. I sank down onto the bed, my thoughts a chaotic storm. The images of what I had just witnessed, the rage in my husband's eyes, the brutality of his actions, kept replaying in my mind. I had never seen him like that before. He wasn't just angry. He was vengeful. And I knew, deep down, that his revenge wouldn't stop here. Minutes turned into hours. I had no idea what time it was, or how long I had been sitting there, paralyzed by fear and regret. But then I heard a sound. The front door opened, a soft click of the lock. My heart leapt into my throat as I instinctively stood up, turning toward the sound. My husband walked back into the house, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. But this time, there was something different about him. His face was emotionless, almost eerily calm. It was like he had turned into someone else entirely, someone I no longer recognized. The man I had once known was gone. This man was a stranger. He didn't even look at me at first. He walked straight past me, heading toward the room where my lover still lay unconscious. I could hear him muttering to himself, but his words were indistinct. His voice, however, was steady, controlled. I hesitated, unsure if I should follow him or not, but something deep inside told me that I had to face whatever was coming. I had to face the consequences of my actions. Slowly, I made my way toward the room. When I stepped inside, I saw my husband standing over my lover's body, his back to me. My lover, still motionless, looked like a broken doll on the floor. My husband was crouched down beside him, a smug expression on his face. "Wake up," he said, his voice dark, almost soothing. "I want you to see this. I want you to understand exactly what I've done." My heart pounded in my chest as I watched, powerless, as my husband stood up and turned toward me. "I'm not going to let you get away with this. Not now. Not ever," he said quietly. His voice was so calm, so controlled, that it sent a shiver down my spine. Then he looked down at my lover, a cold smile spreading across his face. He thinks he's going to walk away from this, that he'll survive. But he won't. Neither of you will. The finality in his voice cut through the room like a blade. I could feel my legs shaking beneath me. What was he going to do? What had he already done? "I made sure he would never hurt me, or you, again," he continued, as if speaking to himself. "He won't be a problem for us anymore." I could feel the blood draining from my face as his words sank in. My lover, the man I had risked everything for, was no longer a threat. But what had my husband done to him? And what did this mean for me? My husband turned to face me now, his gaze steady. "You've made your choice. You chose him over me. But you didn't think about the consequences. You didn't think about what would happen when I found out. And now I'm making sure you understand just how far you can push me." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could I apologize? How could I explain that it wasn't supposed to go this far? That I never thought it would come to this? But there was no turning back now. My marriage, my life, everything I had known, was falling apart. And it was all because of one reckless decision. My husband stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw something else in his eyes. Something that made my blood run cold. There was no love left in him. Not for me. Not for anyone. "I'm done with you," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "This is over." I stood there, frozen in place as my husband's words echoed in my ears. This is over. There was no softness, no sign of hesitation. It was final. The reality of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. My marriage was over, and I had no one to blame but myself. I looked at him, the man I had once loved, and now he seemed like a stranger. His eyes, cold, unforgiving, locked onto mine. I could see the anger in them, but more than that, there was something deeper. A betrayal of trust that couldn't be repaired. The connection we once had was gone, severed completely by my actions. "You're leaving, aren't you?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. He nodded once, his face unreadable. "I don't know why you thought you could get away with this. You think I wouldn't find out? You think I wouldn't see the signs? I've been watching you, waiting for the moment when you'd slip up." The pain in my chest deepened as I realized how much he had known, how long he had been suffering in silence while I carried on with my lies. My husband had known about my affair, and I hadn't even had the decency to hide it well enough. "Please," I whispered, but my voice cracked. Please don't leave me like this. His expression softened for just a moment, but only for a moment. You already left me, he said quietly, as if stating an undeniable fact. And now, I'm leaving you. I won't be the fool who keeps forgiving you. I've had enough. I wanted to beg him to stay, to fight for us. But the truth was, I didn't deserve his forgiveness. I didn't deserve anything from him. I had destroyed the one person who had stood by me through everything. And now, I was left to face the consequences of my choices. As my husband turned to leave, something in me snapped. The anger, the guilt, the regret, it all came crashing together in a wave. I had been so focused on my own desires, my own wants, that I had destroyed everything that truly mattered. And now, I was paying the price. I collapsed onto the bed, my heart aching, my mind spinning. The tears came then, uncontrollable, as I realized the magnitude of what I had lost. My marriage, my family, my husband's trust, all gone. And it was my fault. But there was more to come. My husband had made it clear that this wasn't the end. He wasn't just leaving me. He was taking everything with him. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I was about to find out. The days following my husband's departure felt like a slow, suffocating descent into a nightmare. The house, once full of life and laughter, was now eerily quiet. My lover had vanished, leaving nothing but the remnants of his presence. His clothes, his things, gone. It felt like everything I had built was crumbling, piece by piece. But what truly shattered me wasn't the absence of my lover, or even my husband. It was the realization that I had no one left. My actions had alienated everyone who had ever cared about me. I was completely alone, and the weight of that loneliness pressed heavily on my chest. I tried to reach out to my husband, but my calls went unanswered. I knew it was over between us. But a part of me, one that I hated, still hoped he would take me back. Maybe, if I groveled enough, if I begged enough, he would forgive me. But I knew deep down that I had already pushed him too far. There was no going back. The final blow came when I received a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer. My husband had filed for divorce. The letter was brief and to the point, but the words stung with the finality of the decision. My husband had already moved on, and he was taking everything with him. The house, the assets, even the things I thought I could keep, gone. He had made sure to protect himself, and I was left with nothing. I sat there staring at the letter in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. Not after everything we had been through, but it was happening, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But as I read through the divorce papers, a sick realization began to dawn on me. My husband wasn't just ending our marriage. He was taking steps to ensure I had no future. The legal documents outlined the division of assets, but they also contained something else. A clause that stripped me of any financial support. No alimony. No nothing. He had made it clear I would have to survive on my own, and that was the hardest pill to swallow. For all the years we had been together, for all the trust and love we had shared, he had no sympathy for me now. My affair, my betrayal, had cost me everything, and he wasn't going to let me get away without facing the consequences. In that moment, I realized the true cost of my actions. I hadn't just ruined my marriage. I had ruined my life. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself standing at the very edge of the life I had once known. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter was now a cold, hollow shell. My friends, my family, everyone had abandoned me. The world outside seemed distant, unreachable. But as I sat there, wallowing in my own guilt, something inside me began to shift. The bitterness, the regret, the pain. It was all consuming. Yet I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I had to change. I had to rebuild my life, no matter how hard that was going to be. I had made a series of choices that led me here. Choices driven by selfishness, by a need for something I thought I lacked. But now, with everything lost, I saw the truth clearly. The love I had once shared with my husband was irreparable. But I could still find a way to reclaim myself. In the end, my affair, my betrayal, and my husband's vengeance had taught me a hard lesson. Actions have consequences, and no one is immune to the fallout. I couldn't undo the damage I had caused, but I could take responsibility for it and work to become a better person. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only redemption I could hope for. As I moved forward, the road wasn't easy. I had no safety net, no cushion to fall back on. But I began to rebuild, slowly, methodically. I started to work again, putting my energy into something productive, focusing on things I had long neglected. Over time, I found a sense of peace within myself, though I would never forget what I had lost. Sometimes, I wonder if my ex-husband feels the same way. If, in his own way, he's healed from the wounds I inflicted on him. I'll never know. But I do know one thing. Life goes on, for better or worse. And in the end, that's all any of us can do. Move forward, with or without the people who were once important to us.